Hello everyone and welcome to Self-Care Sunday. My name is Jessie and we are going to get started today by doing a cross-stitch activity. So if you picked up one of our cross-stitch kits from the Glencoe Library, which is who's sponsoring putting together this video, then you already have everything that you need with the exception of a pair of scissors. I have here a pair of embroidery scissors. Whatever scissors you have at home will work. They don't have to be embroidery scissors. But in case you are finding the supplies for this project on your own, the things that you will need are a piece of, I believe it's pronounced Aida fabric. I could be wrong, could be like Ada or something. It's spelled A-I-D-A. Anyway, it's the fabric that's got this lovely little cross-hatch pattern on it that we're going to need for our cross stitch. All these little holes in squares. This is a 14 count Aida if you are getting your own supplies here. And this needs to be, I would say, about 4 by 4. Mine's a little smaller than that because I'm using some scrap fabric, but it's a pretty small piece. So then you'll also need a hoop. So it's a 3-inch bamboo hoop that you'll have in your kit or that you can buy at any old craft store. And then 3 colors of thread. So my colors are slightly different from the colors that you will have if you got the cross stitch kit, because I only bought enough thread for the kits and I forgot that I need some for myself for the example. So I have, as you can see, DMC 797, 798, and 809. You will have 798, 799, and 800, which are all 3 shades of blue that are going to create a lovely ombre once we make this pattern here. So then, yeah, you'll also have a needle, which if you got the kit is going to be on a little piece of paper with some magnet tape. That'll help because it'll be a place to rest your needle when you're not using it. I have a little needle box here that I am going to use. It's got a little magnet in it. And then the last thing, of course, is your pattern. So I am going to teach this today as though you are a person who has never done cross stitch in their entire life and this is brand new to you. So I'm going to explain absolutely everything and we're going to start with how to read this pattern. Now, this pattern is available at bit.ly/SCS packets. There's no it's just SDS packets. I'll put that URL probably in the corner of this video so that you can find it easily, and it has this pattern as well as written versions of the instructions I'm giving here. Personally, I find it easier to follow a video for this type of thing rather than the written instructions, but also these are the written instructions that I used to learn how to do cross stitch in the first place, and they're pretty easy to find if you just Google how to cross stitch for beginners or something like that. I also kind of customized the directions for this specific project in the packet, so if that's helpful to you, feel free to use it. But anyway, I don't know why I started putting that away because we still need it. So, how to read a cross stitch pattern. So as you can see here, we have our lovely ombre heart. At the bottom, we've got this little legend, and the legend is going to tell you what any legend tells you, which is what each color means. Now, I've given you both a color and a symbol for each of the different DMC threads. So X and light blue is 800, O and medium blue is 799, and then V and dark blue is 798. Now, depending on what pattern you're following, it might have symbols, it might have colors, it might have both. I find both the most helpful, which is why I have both. In addition, I have the height and the width here. There are calculators you can use online to figure out, depending on what size of fabric you're using, whether it's 14 count or 16 count or whatever. It'll tell you how big it'll turn out in inches so that you can find the appropriate size frame and cut out the appropriate size fabric and all of that. So pretty simple. Basically, any square where there is a letter in color represents one stitch. I think it's called a cross stitch. So I'll show you a little bit what I mean by each symbol is a stitch in a second here, but first things first, we're going to need to get our fabric onto our little hoop. Hoop. And to do that, you're going to unscrew lefty-loosey the little screw that's on the top here. Pull that out. And then we're going to separate the two halves. So you'll end up with a round hoop like this, totally round, and then one like this that's got a little opening at the top here. And what you'll want to do is you'll just place your fabric on top of the smaller ring. And then you'll take the ring with the opening at the top and just put that right on top. And this is fitting nice and easily because it's very small. Sometimes with the bigger ones it takes a little fiddling. But luckily, this is a small size. So once you've got it on, and it does help, by the way, to leave the ring and the fabric flat on a surface like this instead of trying to, I often try to hold it up in the air and do it and then I get frustrated because it's not working. So flat surface is best. And then righty-tighty, we will put the screw back in. Did I put it the wrong way? No. It's going in. Some of these, depending on what type you buy, some of them just have a regular screw, just have one screw piece like this, and then sometimes there's one screw on this side and then there's another like end piece here. Okay, so you'll want to screw that nice and tight because that's going to hold the fabric in place for you. So the next step is going to be threading our needle, which is one of those things that sounds easier than it is. Actually, the real next step, I lied. The next step is going to be unraveling some thread here. So grab your darkest color. For me that's 797, for you that's going to be 798. And you're just going to unravel. Recommended length is 12 to 18 inches. I usually use my arm to measure it, like with dental floss. But basically you want it to be not too long. If it's too short, the only problem you'll have is you'll just have to keep re-cutting thread, and if it's too long, you run into bigger issues like your thread starts knotting. So if you're new to cross stitch, I would recommend going shorter rather than longer. The other thing you'll notice here, I will actually do this on camera so I can be helpful to you. So the other thing that you'll notice is that the thread is actually made up of 6 smaller threads. Okay, this one's only 4 because I've used this color before, but if you look closely, let me see if I can get it on camera there. There you go. You can see that there's actually 4 little strands. It's not quite focused. There we go. There's 4 little strands. Yours will have 6. You'll have 6 little strands, and what you're going to want to do is separate those strands. So you can do this with 1 strand or 2, or you can go with all 6 if you really want. I don't know if that will fit in the needle very well though. It's the biggest issue. So for beginners, I find it's easiest to just pull 1 thread separate from the others, and that's also, if you just do 1, you're least likely to get tangles, which I'm getting a little bit of now, but that's okay. Okay, so now we just have 1 single strand of thread. I like to snip off the end of the thread to make it a little easier. So we'll often put the end of the thread in my mouth, which you can't really see me do because of where the camera is, but that will help hold the threads together. If you've ever seen anyone do that, that is why. So threading the needle is really just, here, let me do it against the background of the white so you can see it better. You're just going to hold the end in one hand, you're going to line up the needle, and you're going to pull it through. My edge has already started fraying, so I put it in my mouth again. Okay. There we go. I didn't do it in front of the white background, but hopefully that's helpful enough. If it takes you like 15 minutes to do this, or even longer, don't worry about it. That's pretty normal for threading needles for the first time. It's a tricky thing to get used to, but you'll want to pull like an inch through or so like this. Especially when you're first starting, you want a lot to pull through so that the needle doesn't unthread itself super easily, because that's really annoying. Now, your cross stitch instructions recommend starting in the middle. That's probably smart. Starting at the center of the pattern. I prefer to start at one end of the pattern, and it really doesn't matter. It's really what makes your heart happy. So I'm going to start down here, and what you're going to do is you're going to find one of the holes, and you're going to stick the needle through the hole. I know, you're really shocked. So then you'll slowly pull your thread through. You don't want to go too fast, especially at the beginning, because this first stitch is the trickiest one. So there's a good diagram of this in the packet that I got from that site I mentioned that really helps you understand what the cross stitch is. But you see here there's one hole that I've gone through, the one that's kitty corner, so up one and over one, that's where I'm going to put it back in. Then I'm going to flip this bad boy over, pull through slowly again, and we're going to pull till we have, once again, about an inch right here. And what you're going to do with that inch is you're going to fold it in such a way that it's now in between this top thread and the one, like where the thread is coming out of, and the hole underneath it. You're going to put the needle through the hole that's underneath it. Once again, we're going to pull it all the way through this time, and we're going to keep holding with our other hand onto the inch of string, so that when we pull it all the way through, we've now basically created a knot. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm pulling on the thread and it's not coming out. So that's your ideal. You can also make a knot if you know how to do like a sewing knot. I am not going to try to explain that because I don't know how to explain it, I just know how to do it. The instructions that I pulled this from will tell you not to do that because it will make the back of your cross stitch bumpy, but who cares what the back looks like, am I right? So then you've now done 3 of the 4 stitches in a cross stitch. There's 1, 2 is kitty corner, 3 coming out the bottom, and then this 4th hole we're going to complete the X. And now you have done your very first cross stitch. Yay! And like I said, the first one is going to be the trickiest because you're making that beginning knot. So, as our pattern shows us, so what I've done here is this V right here. And something I like to do, especially on bigger projects, is I'll use a pen to scribble out the ones I've already done, or you can use like a highlighter or pencil, whatever makes you happy, whatever you have around. And that way I can keep track of, I've already stitched this part, and what do I need to stitch still that's not done already. That was a slightly rambly explanation, but you know what I mean. It just helps you keep track of what you've already done and what you still have to do. That's what I meant. So, the next part of our pattern is a row of 3. So I'm going to show you one way of doing a row. So once again, we're going to pull through this hole, and I'm using the one that's 1 over. So if you look at the pattern again, I'm stitching this. You could just go directly up and do this one and then do 2 on the sides. It's really up to you. I find it easier to do things in rows, but do whatever makes the most sense for you. So once again, we'll go kitty corner, pull through. This time we don't have to be as careful because the thread's not going to come undone. Come up through the hole underneath and pull through, and this again, it might take you a lot longer than it's taking me. In through this top one, I'm just going to keep demonstrating it and talking at the same time. But yeah, when the very first cross stitch I did, I think it took me like an hour to do my first like 5 stitches, and that is very normal. If your thread gets tangled, don't panic, first of all. That's also very normal, and you have more than enough thread if you have the kit. If you went out and bought these supplies, you have way more than enough thread, but I made sure that the kits you had plenty of thread so that if you have to cut out a knot, it's not going to be a big deal. Haha, knot. Okay, so got this row of 3 done. The next row is going to be a row of 5. You can already tell that this heart is going to be slightly lower than center, which is what I get for not starting in the middle of the pattern, but it's not that serious. Okay, so another way that you can do a row of stitches. So what I just did was I made a bunch of individual cross stitches like we did our first one. For this one, this way, what you can also do is you can do half a stitch at a time. So you pull through the hole just like normal. You put the needle through the kitty corner one, and then you're going to go through the same hole that's underneath it, just like this. But instead of going up and back, you're going to go to the next kitty corner one. The next one that's one up and over. So you can see I've got these half stitches here. And we're going to make a whole row of 5 of those. And then what we'll do is once we've made all of the half stitches, we'll go back and make them complete stitches. These are just honestly 2 different ways of doing it. If one seems easier to you than another, use it. For this pattern, you can absolutely do this half stitch way of doing things for the whole thing, because the whole thing is in rows. Depending on the pattern that you're doing, sometimes you need to do individual stitches like we learned at the beginning. But for this one, it's totally up to you which way you want to do it. Alright, so I was gonna stop talking for a bit. I'm actually gonna finish this row, and then I'm gonna show you a very important skill, which is unpicking a stitch if you do one incorrectly, which is an important skill for beginners and for everyone. I still use this skill of unpicking a thread all the time. Alright. So as you can see, I'm going backwards on these half stitches now. So I'm coming up from the bottom left corner of the square, pulling through, going up to the top right, pulling through, and repeat until the row is finished. Ta-da! Okay, so that's that row. So for the next row, I'll start a stitch and then I'll show you how to undo it, because it is easy to make mistakes in cross stitch, and you know what? It's not a big deal if you do. So I'm gonna make this next stitch. Oh, and my thread got a little tangled there. We'll talk about what to do with tangled threads too. Alright, so let's say that I misaim and I put this 2 over, and now I've got this like wonky stitch. So the easiest thing to do, if you can pull it off, is to just do the stitch in reverse. So whatever hole your needle went through, the right one, the wrong one, I'm assuming it's not the right one if you're having to undo it, just send the needle back through the opposite way, and ta-da! No harm done. sometimes what happens is maybe your thread gets tangled, or maybe you're just not experienced yet at pulling the thread through and your needle comes unthreaded. Again, do not panic. If you did that stitch correctly, all you have to do is leave it, rethread, and keep going. If, however, you've got an incorrect stitch or you've got a tangle and you need to unpick the stitch, the easiest thing I find is to use the needle and just go underneath the thread like this and pull it back out. Now, if your thread tangles, and again, I cannot emphasize enough not to panic. Oh yeah, okay, mine is doing it, so we can have a live example. I will often use the thread to try to unpick the knot. And in this case, I don't know how well you can see it. Are my hands in the way? Okay, so you've got a couple choices here. This knot is really close to the end of the thread that's going through, so it's going to be a pain to try to cut it out. It's doable, you just might have to undo a few stitches. Doesn't seem like I'm going to be able to pick it out with my needle, which is unfortunate. So honestly, I will just ignore this knot and I'm going to pull extra hard to tug it all the way through, and then okay, yeah, it was so close that it didn't even really, the knot didn't really even come through to the other side. So if it's a small knot like that, you do have the option to just ignore it and pull it through. Otherwise, you can try to unpick it with your needle, which is sometimes successful, or you can just cut the end of the thread. Particularly like if there was a knot right here, for example, I would just cut it off, rethread the needle, and then keep going. Alright, so now I will, as mentioned, be a bit quieter. I'll probably do a nice time-lapse video here. Back. The camera started falling over, so I moved to the angle. Here we go. Back to cross stitching. So the main reason I find cross stitch to be so relaxing is the repetitive motion, similar to coloring, as well as the ability to create something out of nothing, which I think is really cool. You know, we start with all of these separate supplies, and by the end you have one coherent piece of art, which is awfully exciting, I think. The other thing is you get to stab something repeatedly, which is not an opportunity you have often in life, to stab something repeatedly. Perhaps jack-o'-lantern carving is another option for that, or carving anything, I guess. But yeah, I have one cross-stitch piece that says, warning, this is proof I have the patience to stab something 1,000 times, which I thought was funny. A lot of the cross-stitch patterns I do have funny sayings on them because that makes me laugh. But you can also do ones like this that are, strictly speaking, an image. In fact, a lot of them are just an image. There are also ones with words, if you want to do ones with words. You can find cross-stitch patterns a variety of places. Lately I've been on Pinterest a lot, looking at cross-stitch patterns. There's a lot on there. If you go to the DMC website, DMC, by the way, is the brand of floss or thread that we're using here. Floss is another word for this thread that we're using. It's technically called floss and thread is wrong, but whatever. Anyway, if you go to their website and you give them your email address, they will give you access to a bunch of their patterns for free. Of course, you have to be willing to get emails from them, but I am. And then, you know, you can also just Google like free cross-stitch pattern. Tons of stuff will come up. You can get books of cross-stitch, for example, from your local library. I've definitely done that. You know, or you can buy them, or you can buy individual patterns online as well. If you're like, I don't want a whole book, but I just want this one funny saying as a cross-stitch pattern. So fairly inexpensive, and in fact, cross-stitch is a fairly inexpensive hobby overall. Like, an entire thing of floss is less than $1, so you can get a bunch of colors for like 20 bucks. That would get you like 25 colors. They also sell like multi-packs of thread too, if you want to get like the whole rainbow for 10 bucks or whatever. And, you know, once you have kind of the basic supplies, restocking is not terribly expensive, and patterns run from like $2 to $4 or $5 each. So that's nice. And again, you can find a lot of free ones or get books through your local library. So we are at the end of the dark blue portion of this heart. So now I'm going to show you how to finish off the stitch. So what you're going to do is you're going to slide the needle underneath at least 3 stitches if you can swing it. So the needle's going to be kind of horizontal to the pattern there, and you'll just pull it through like that. Again, you could probably use a sewing needle, or rather a sewing knot here if you wanted to, but you certainly don't have to. And then all you're going to do is just trim that thread off at the end, and voila, that is the dark blue section done. So next I'm going to work on my middle blue section here, which for you will be DMC 799. Another thing I want to mention, because I'm here and we're talking cross stitch, is that if you don't have the exact colors that a cross stitch pattern calls for, don't worry about it. I know I say that a lot in this channel, but really, oh no, look at that tangle, that's so bad. Alright, it just came undone though, all by itself. Yeah, you can just swap out the colors. Either, you know, you can say, I don't have that exact light blue, I'm going to use a different light blue, or I'll even sometimes be like, oh, I think this would look better in purple, and I'm going to change the yellow parts of this pattern to a shade of purple. Totally cool. I like to write down on my pattern what replacement color I used, just so I can keep track of that in case like one of my thread colors goes missing or something. I have to replace it. I misplaced my cross stitch supplies a surprising amount for someone who cross stitches pretty regularly. But that's just because I have a lot of things to misplace. That's why it's helpful to have something like a little magnet strip that is in your kit, or let me show you a needle minder. I have one nearby actually. So needle minders are just little magnets with 2 halves. They make them in all sorts of cute patterns. This one, as you can see, is Harry Potter. And so all I do is pop Harry Potter onto the front and the magnet onto the back, and I can take my needle and rest it on the magnet. And that's helpful because it means you're less likely to lose your needle, which is not something you want to do, especially if you walk around the house barefoot. I spend a lot of time looking for needles I've dropped using the camera on my phone because it's under the couch or whatever. Oh, another thing I thought of to mention to you is that I am doing all of my stitches with the pattern facing front, and that's because I'm pretty used to doing this. But if it's helpful to you, you can always flip the pattern over to do the holes on the back. Especially when you're starting, that can be easier than trying to kind of see your way in the dark. So you'll end up flipping the pattern, you'll end up flipping your fabric over and over, rather. But that's just part of the process. Okay. Oh no, so in trying to undo a knot there, I just accidentally pulled the string apart, which can happen sometimes. It's a little fragile. Luckily I've got enough of a tail here that I can still tie a knot at the end. And if you find yourself in a situation where, due to a knot or whatever reason, your string is a little too short to make the ending knot, all you have to do is just unpick a little bit of your stitching, which can be annoying, but it's necessary sometimes. I'm actually kind of glad that the thread is tangling so much this video, because it gives me the opportunity to show you some tips and tricks for undoing your knots and your loops that accidentally come in. I had one earlier and had to unpick my stitching until it got back to being not loopy in the back. But again, if your back is super ugly, like, don't worry about it. Usually the back of my cross stitch pieces looks terrible. There are some folks who really pride themselves on having really tidy and beautiful backs of their cross stitch pieces. And if that's you, more power to you. But I figure I'm only looking at the front, so what do I care what the back looks like. Okay, working off my sheet here, and on to the next row. Two pro tips here. One is, you'll notice that I've been separating my one thread and just setting aside the rest of the thread. This is not the ideal way of doing things. You certainly can do it, but a better idea is to rewrap it around your, it's called a bobbin here. And the way you do that is just put it at a diagonal through one of these slots here. You wrap, 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 wrap until you're all the way done, and then you stick it through the slot again, just like that. And that will keep it from getting tangled while it's sitting to the side. Another pro tip is that something that's handy to have on hand is a lint roller. And the reason it's helpful is you can use it to pick up little bitty pieces of thread that you would otherwise leave all over the place. I have 2 cats, so on average we have about 18 lint rollers in active use in my house at a time. You can also use your lint roller to get cat hair off of your cross stitch pattern, or dog hair, or your own hair, or whatever gets on your cross stitch. I'll talk a little more at the end about how to finish your cross stitch piece. Alright, so now that I am getting close to the end of our heart here, I'm going to talk you through how to finish a cross stitch piece. And I don't mean how to make the final knot, because that's going to be the same as the other knots that you've made previously in this process. But I'm talking about how to finish it in such a way that you could, say, hang it on a wall or give it as a gift. There are basically 2 ways to do that. One is to use the hoop that you've been sewing in to finish it, and then the other is to frame it. So for a pattern this size, you would want to use a very small frame. Michaels sells like mini frames. You can also find similar mini frames at the dollar store. Little like 2x2, 2x3, 3x3 type of sizes. Or you can just keep it in the hoop that you've been stitching it in and display it that way. Totally up to you, whatever you think will look nicer. I usually do a mix of both for my cross stitch patterns. If it's more of a round or an abstract shape, I'll keep it in the hoop, and if it's more of a square or rectangle shape, I will often put it in a square or rectangle frame. But regardless of which method you use, the first 2 steps are going to be the same. First, you're going to want to wash your cross stitch piece, and the reason for that is all of our hands have natural oils on them, which are normal and healthy for our body, but they will gradually degrade fabric over time. If anyone's ever told you not to touch theater curtains, it's for the same reason. So the way to wash it is super simple. You're just going to run it under cold water. Then you're going to fill a bowl of the appropriate size with warm water and like 3 drops of dish soap. You can actually really use any kind of really gentle soap, so if you have like a gentle hand soap or something you'd rather use, that's fine. I usually use dish soap because it's super mild. And then you're gonna put your piece in there. Take it out of the hoop first. So you'll take it out of the hoop, you'll put it in the water for anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour. And once your time is finished, you'll just rinse it in cold water again to get all the soap out, and then you just leave it to air dry. Once it is dry, you'll want to iron it. Reason for that is once you wash it, it's going to get kind of wrinkly. You don't want it to be wrinkly. And then you'll either put it back into your hoop, and you'll want to make sure to have it centered within the hoop as well as possible, or you'll put it inside your frame, and either of those will require you to cut the piece down to size. My best advice there is measure twice, cut once, because you can't uncut the fabric, but you can always cut more off if needed. So go slowly on that, especially your first time. And then you'll glue it into place. So for a frame, theoretically for a frame, you don't even need to glue it. You can just put the glass over it and it'll stay in place. But I like to glue it to the little cardboard that comes in the back of the frame just to make sure it doesn't move around in there ever. And then for a hoop, what you do is you cut off this extra fabric, and then you'll glue it down using, if you have a fabric glue, that works the best, but I think you could probably also just use like a tacky glue or something. Maybe hot glue, who knows? Probably wouldn't recommend hot glue because you have to hold the fabric down for a couple seconds to get it to stick to the hoop usually, and hot glue will burn your fingers if you do that, so maybe don't take that piece of advice. But yeah, then when you're done, you'll have a beautiful piece that you can hang on your wall, or I like to give these as gifts a lot. They are a great homemade gift. Or you can just keep it for yourself and smile at it. I have a bunch of pieces that I have finished and then not yet hung up. I want to make like a whole cross-stitch wall in my house where I just hang a bunch of different cross stitches that I've done. I think that would be great fun, but I have not gotten around to it yet. I feel like this heart design in particular is a good one for gifts because, you're giving it to your mom or your friend or whatever, and perhaps you heart them. Love. I realized also as I was doing this that this would be an easy pattern to do with just one color, if you wanted to just do one instead of doing the ombre. I kind of like the ombre effect, but if you're thinking like, oh, I just want to do one in a solid color, that's super easy. All you have to do is just use one color instead of three. So yeah, just a couple more stitches here until I finish up. But hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. Cross stitch is one of my favorite hobbies, so I was really excited to get to share it with folks as part of Self-Care Sunday, and to be able to make kits so you can give it a try even if you don't have any of the supplies at home. I consider this, I think I just said this is one of my favorite hobbies, but I've been doing a lot of it during the pandemic, and it really is just a lovely thing to do, maybe with a podcast on, or with a TV show on in the background, or just by itself. You can have conversations while you're doing it. This is a good social craft, actually, if you're able to safely meet up with others. Or you can even do it on Zoom, do what I'm doing now. Do a video chat with someone. Maybe work on the same cross-stitch piece together. I think that would be fun. Or totally different crafts. There's such a thing as craft circles where people get together and they all make crafts, and I think that sounds super fun. I've thought about trying to find a virtual one I could join. Maybe we'll start one at the library. If that's something that interests you, let me know. We don't have comments turned on YouTube, but you can always email the library or message us on Discord. We have a Self-Care Sunday specific channel in the Discord. It's a great place to leave your video comments. And there we go, folks. We now have a completed ombre heart. Alright, so for the second part of our Self-Care Sunday video today, we're going to do what I'm calling a beginner's guide to drinking tea. So for a long time I didn't think that I liked tea, and that's because the only tea that I'd had was Earl Grey, which is a fine tea, but it's a bit bitter. And if you're not used to tea, I can't say I recommend it as your very first cup. But there are a ton of kinds of teas in the world, and a lot of the variety you'll find out there are different blends of different types of tea, so they'll take different ingredients and put them together to make some lovely tea blends. But today I'm going to talk about some pretty basic types. So here I've got a bag of black tea, specifically a chocolate mint black tea. So black teas are like coffee in a lot of ways. You can drink them with the same things that you would normally put in coffee, like cream or milk or sugar. If you want to sweeten it up, if you want to cut down on the bitterness a little bit. Depending on the black tea that you're drinking, the bitterness is going to vary. So this one, because it's a mint chocolate tea, it mostly tastes like mint chocolate as opposed to just unadulterated black tea, which is definitely a very different flavor. Earl Grey is a type of black tea, so again, if that particular set of flavors does not appeal to you, I would steer away from that category of tea and check out some of the other categories. Now, black tea is going to be caffeinated, unless it explicitly says decaf on it. Black tea has generally less caffeine than a cup of coffee, but it is still caffeine, so be mindful of that when you're drinking it. Let's see, my next category here is green tea. I have some green tea with pomegranate, which is extra yummy. Green tea is great for a lot of things. It has a lot of health benefits, including antioxidants. I love a green tea as kind of a pick-me-up in the middle of a long day. It is, again, caffeinated, but less so than black tea. So for me, a person who drinks a lot of caffeine, it's like a very light caffeine boost. If you're someone who doesn't drink a lot of caffeine or doesn't drink any caffeine, might be more of an issue for you. And again, I would steer you towards decaf, or in a minute we're going to talk about some types of tea that don't have any caffeine at all. But the difference between a black tea and a green tea, fun fact, they come from the same plant. But the black tea is roasted longer, and so it becomes black in color, whereas the green tea is going to stay green because it's not roasted as long. So green teas are great with honey, generally. You can get just regular green tea, or you can get different varieties like this one that come with pomegranate, or other like fruit flavors are good with green tea. Experiment, see what you like. That's kind of the theme of this whole segment, is to encourage you to give different kinds of tea a shot, because just because you don't like one kind of tea, such as Earl Grey, does not mean that all teas are not for you. So my last tea here is, you'll notice it's not in a container like the other ones. You know, the packaging is going to depend on the brand, obviously. But this is one of my all-time favorites. It's a honey vanilla chamomile flavor. And this is representing today the whole broad category of herbal tea. Herbal tea is definitely what I drink the most, because herbal teas are typically going to be caffeine free. You can check the packaging if you want to be sure, but I was just looking through some of my herbal teas and I was like, oh yeah, these are all caffeine free and therefore great to drink at any time of the day, including at night before bed. I would not want to drink something with caffeine in it then, but a nice herbal tea can be really relaxing before bed, or it can be a great, you know, I said I like to drink green tea at the end of a long day. I feel like black tea is the beginning of my day, green tea is the middle, and then at the end of that long day, I love to have something herbal. So chamomile is one of my favorites. It's one of those go-to flavors for a relaxing tea, but you can find all sorts of stuff. Just in my cabinet, I have cinnamon apple spice, I have a peach flavored tea, I have honey lavender. If you like more of that floral flavor, highly recommend lavender tea, but there's a ton of variety out there. I have one that's sugar cookie flavored, which tastes better than it sounds. But yeah, I encourage you to maybe try a couple of varieties of tea. They make variety of packs of it, so you can get like, you know, 3 of each of 4 different flavors or something. But what's great about tea, and the reason I encourage giving it a shot, is it's just a very relaxing thing to drink. Drinking a hot beverage is one of my go-tos for self-care. It takes a little bit of time to make, which is nice because it's sort of, okay, I'm going to set aside a few minutes to make a cup of tea, to wait for it to steep. You know, and you can't chug it because it's hot, right? I mean, you could, but it's a bad idea. But because it's hot, you have to take your time and really enjoy it. And so, you know, I'll even use tea as like a little timer in a way and say, okay, for the amount of time that I'm drinking this cup of tea, I'm just going to relax, and then when I finish it, I'm going to get back to work. Obviously, you can stretch that as long as you want, or, you know, end up drinking your tea way too fast because you're busy, but, you know, that's just a suggestion, as is everything on this channel. So to make tea, super simple. All you need is your tea bag for whatever kind you're going to make. I'm going to make this chamomile here because it's the afternoon and I'm past the caffeine drinking part of my day. And all you need is pop that on into a mug and you're going to pour some hot water on top of it. I have here an electric kettle. You can use an electric kettle. You can use a regular kettle. You can bring water to boil in a pot over the stove. Or, and don't tell anyone British I said this, if you're British and you're watching this, stop listening for a few seconds. But honestly, if you just want to microwave a cup of tea until the water gets hot, I'm not going to tell anyone. I think it tastes fine. There are some people who will tell you not to make your tea that way, but I'm not one of those people. So yeah, all I'm going to do is I'm going to pour some hot water onto here till I fill the mug, or not quite fill, but most of the way. And then you're going to wait for the tea to steep. Best way to figure out how long to steep a tea is to read the directions that come on the box or on the packet, because it really does vary a lot from tea to tea. Generally speaking, herbal teas and black teas are going to need to steep longer. Green teas and some other types of teas that will steep for less time. But in general, you're going to leave the bag in the hot water for anywhere from a minute to up to about 5 minutes. Longer than 5 minutes and you may end up over steeping your tea and then it ends up becoming bitter, which is a bummer. You can always just make a new cup. And here's a secret. You can even reuse the same tea bag. I don't like hold on to tea bags for days, but I will make one cup, hang on to the tea bag, and then make another cup right after. Beyond like 2 uses, I find the tea tends to get pretty watered down, and even the second one is not quite as potent in my experience, but you know, it reduced waste and you can get more use out of your tea bags that way. So yeah, this is just some introductory information about tea. If you're not a tea drinker and you want to give it a shot, hopefully this information is helpful to you. And thank you for joining us for Self-Care Sunday this week. Hope to see you back next month. We have our self-care Sundays generally are the second Sunday of the month. And yeah, they're usually on our Twitch channel. This one, of course, was premiered on YouTube, but you can check out our Twitch at twitch.tv/Glencoe Library. Actually, I think it's Glencoe Public Library. I'll put that on the video so that you know. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I hope this video was helpful to you, and happy self-care.